absolutely thrilled to be joined this morning by two of my favorite people, Andrew Lynch and Keith Nally, and we are here to discuss with you sustainability and creativity, a catalyst for disruption. Now, this is really, really important for me because I actually asked the guys, could I curate this stage? Because I wanted to make sure we had a discussion today around sustainability that was really positive. So often the conversation around sustainability is based on compliance and this burden of responsibility that we have to the planet, which we do. But can we look at it and change our mindset and have a much more positive and I suppose creative mindset and approach to dealing with these challenges and see them really as the opportunities that there are. You know, this can be about imagination and possibility, a really exciting time. So as I say, I have asked Andrew and Keith to join me today because they're two of the most creative minds that I know, both working in industry, but both who have really grasped that nettle of sustainability and seen it for the flower that it is. Andrew, I'm going to start with you. Would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Thank you very much, Joan. And I just to say it's wonderful to be asked and thank you for thinking of me. My name, as you said, is Andrew Lynch. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer with Irish Manufacturing Research, IMR. And Chief Manufacturing Officer, of course, Joan, means that I'm incredibly important. I'm not pinned down to anything specifically. And it's wonderful to have that ideation creativity within my own role in IMR. IMR is an independent RTO. We're a not-for-profit organization strategically put in place by the state. A third of our funding comes from the government, a third from industry, and a third from European funding and so on. We're the largest engaged network of companies like Intel and Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson and Boston Scientific and Dell and Glanbia and Kerry and all these fantastic groups, and over 250 small to medium-sized enterprises. And we have 4 pillars. I won't waste any time on these, but automation, digitalization, additive manufacturing, which is designed for manufacturing, and the 4th pillar, the one we're talking about this morning, and the one I guess we're all incredibly excited about, sustainability, massive part in manufacturing. I really look forward to getting stuck into it from that perspective. And again, delighted to have Keith, an old warrior, on with me, so I'm sure we'll have a wonderful discussion.
Good morning, Joan. Andrew, thanks for having me as part of this discussion. I'm the creative director at a new distillery being established in Monasterevin, Kildare, Church of Oak Distillery. And beyond that, I also work across the cultural and fashion sectors. And I've always had a keen interest in sustainable practice, having first established, oddly enough, the first HTML player that took on the dominant Flash player at the time, to working with Philips and lighting up a city park in northern Sweden. It was at their time their first kind of foray into LED lighting, to working on a waterless denim facility that is now working with Levi's, etc. in India, to also recently producing the first actual sustainable bottle that could fit through a Dutch letterbox. Now, where does all that play in? That plays into the multidisciplinary approach that I try and enact and bring to whatever project I touch. So that's a little bit of my background. I tend to avoid kind of names, places, people, etc., as you're well aware.
Keith, thank you so much for that. I mean, I know that you two are going to be a great combo, and I know that you know each other already. And of course, I know both of you. Andrew, you of course didn't mention that you were in fact my next door neighbour down the road here in Mullingar.
Yes.
Our offices are just around the corner from here. So we've got the Midlands well and truly represented between County Kildare, down near Monasterevin and Mullingar, and also your offices up in Dublin as well. But so
and I am Joan. I am a Corkman as well. I should say that for the audience. I am transplanted into the Midlands, so I bring the best of both worlds clearly.
Well, we couldn't have life without Cork, so we'll give you that. Right. So obviously sustainability, a recurring theme for all three of us, even in my own role in Siemens through digitalisation, because of course my attitude is people talk about these buzzwords like digitalisation and sustainability. Is sustainability the new thing? And I said, well, I defy you to get sustainable without digitalization, you know, so the technology is a really important part of that and creating huge opportunity for innovation. Andrew, can you tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing in the IMR in that space?
So I guess, Joan, just maybe to put a little bit of context in manufacturing in general, because sometimes I feel, you know, I'm in this world my whole life and you often have to articulate it. It has this this element around manufacturing. What is it and what does it mean really? And just from an Irish perspective, it's over 30% of our GDP. It's 11% of our direct employment here. You know, nobody exports more ICT product from their shores than Ireland. We're the second highest exporter of medical device product anywhere in Europe. 60% of all of the world's hip and knee joints are made in Munster. We make 70% of the world's Tic Tacs. You know, we make 30% of the world's contact lenses, most of the Viagra, all the Botox. It doesn't matter what sector you're in. There's an incredible footprint in manufacturing here in this island, but not just Ireland. I mean, when you look at, say, Europe, for example, 80% of European exports come from the manufacturing sector. And that's, you know, 7.3 trillion turnover, 6 million people directly employed. So manufacturing is a massive part of the economy. And you know, there's all sorts of really interesting areas around manufacturing. You know, there was fantastic, you love this, Joan.
I do need you to talk about sustainability in that.
Yes, absolutely. I will. They were saying that if you cut the manufacturing jobs in a particular environment, the divorce rate goes up more than any other sector. So that's manufacturing in a general sense. But if you think about manufacturing, you're making stuff, you're building product and so on. And for a lot of my lifetime, manufacturing was seen as a solution. But as we've looked at it from a sustainable lens, that messaging has changed completely. You know, you get this old moniker of manufacturing, these pillars of towers and dirty smoke coming out and all that kind of concept. And manufacturing has a major challenge from a PR perspective, which is one thing. But the real element underpinning all of this is the articulation of the joy that manufacturing is changing its value proposition, and sustainability underpins all of that. People are not interested in getting product now unless it's ethically derived, unless it has less of an impact. They're looking at travel miles, they're looking at recyclability, they're looking at the circular economy and wherever it is. And our current digitalization guru in Europe has said that manufacturing companies of the future will be digital, resilient and sustainable, or they won't exist. So this is fundamental to us.
There's something really interesting there. And when you talk about manufacturing as a solution and people, you know, we can make our answer to everything. And of course, one of the central pillars for sustainability that every child in the country can tell you is reduce, reuse and recycle. So the principle of reduce is to consume less. And if one is consuming less, you'd argue that you're making less. So, you know, are the demands, what's the impact of that on manufacturing? And actually, yeah, so that's one part of it that's obviously going to impact that sector. But these businesses still have to make money and they have to be financially sustainable, and we're asking them to make less. And I think that the circular economy kind of comes in, isn't it?
You're making less, but you have more people to service. Do you know what I mean? The population of the world is growing. The consumer concepts that we've got as a society are extending, you know, and this is fundamental to the use of all the products that we've got. Everything that's sitting in front of us, somebody made somewhere, somebody designed somewhere, somebody put it in front of us somewhere. So I don't see it as a negative. That reduce thing is very important. It's one part of 3 pillars and so on. But actually, you should expand your thought. I mean, when we're looking at it here, we can go in and we can create new and ever more complex products. And one of the parameters is going to be the impact on society. And I think that's the key here. And it's a fantastic opportunity because, as you said in your introduction, the more digital brilliance that we're bringing online and the more computational power we have for managing, the more knowledge we have as a society, the bigger the opportunity. And that's really...
Keith has put his hand up there, and I'm pretty sure he wants to say something about that bit around design. So I'm going to let Keith in.
Keith. That's okay. I've learned how to raise my hand. No, it's interesting to hear Andrew discussing this, and I'm interested in how we move past the idea of an economic-driven destruction and reframe that narrative. And is that narrative reframed through education, purpose storytelling? And, you know, what are the consequences of any product we touch and any product we create through design? Because it does have serious social, ecological, and environmental consequences. So I'm interested in how IMR is approaching that. I know how we're approaching that, and I can discuss that further.
I'd like to hear how you do that, Keith.
Actually, I'm going to talk about what Keith is doing, because actually what's really interesting to me from your sector point of view, Keith, is that nothing screams in it for the long haul like distilling whiskey, because it takes time, and nothing screams in it for the long haul like climate change. So obviously, I've always had this premise on digitalization and innovation, is that you can do digitalization and there are faster horses projects, you know, do the same thing more efficiently, cut out costs. And then there's the car, you know, if you could ask the market what they would have wanted, they'd have said a faster horse, but the opportunity for innovation was the car. And I'm going, yeah, that's grand, that's great. But disruption Disruption is asking yourself, well, a faster horse and a car are predicated on a need to get from A to B as quickly as possible. Disruption is surely asking yourself, what do you need to go to B for? You know, disruption is saying, why don't you just stay at A? Or what is C? Is it a completely different thing? So Keith, tell me a little bit about that broader ecosystem approach that you guys have been taking.
Well, it's very difficult to get to B sometimes in whiskey because you have to lay it down for so long.
Yeah.
We know it's an age-old industry. It's one of our earliest industries, heavy industries in Ireland. And it was obviously decimated due kind of economic practices elicited elsewhere. So the whiskey industry is exponentially growing again in Ireland, which is fantastic to see. I believe by the time we come online, there'll be 42 to 43 distilleries established in the country. Now, whether they still exist in 5, 6, 10 years' time, we don't know. What I'm interested in, and the partners are interested in, is the idea of cosmo-localism, which is reducing our footprint within the areas we live. Yous are both in the Kildare Midlands region. We're in the Kildare Midlands region. How that translates is that we try and work locally. We work with local farmers, we work with local producers, etc. Grain is supplied from Kildare into the distillery, which is in Kildare, which is then outputted into a maturation site, which is in Kildare. We're looking at distribution models that are primarily looking within the context of the island, so Ireland. And then beyond that, we'll see if we want to establish further afield. Ireland can support their industry. It can support the 40-odd distilleries that are being established. So we're happy to operate within this market. Further afield though, and back to your question of how we do that, we take a multidisciplinary approach. We work with partners both within Ireland and globally. We take a mindset to establish new ideas around traceability and data, which feeds a little bit into, I suppose, the idea of biomimicry and the circular economy. So for us, I guess it's about becoming good ancestors to a degree. So how we've done that, we've established a best-in-class track and trace solution, as you're well aware. We call it a grain-to-glass solution. And we've done that in partnership with the British Standards Institute, who are bringing their experience to bear around certification. So not only are we just looking at a consumer play, we're looking at how this product can be established within the market and businesses can actually use it, not just within the whiskey industry, but the wider food industry.
That's actually really, I like that bit about traceability and from grain to glass is interesting for me from the point of view, we were talking about, you know, this is sustainability is an opportunity. And actually from a consumer point of view, we're trying to build products that excite our consumers, that actually, you know, enhance their experience, that they have some kind of visceral reaction to them. And actually a lot of consumers now, all the market indications are that, you know, people are buying products that are marketed as sustainable. And they're really searching for good value, sustainable solutions. And I want to buy, I mean, whiskey, you know, a celebration, it really is all about provenance, that there is story, you mentioned story in it. And actually that traceability from grain to glass is really important and actually adds value to the end product, not just as something we want to do because it's nice, something we want to do because we have to do it, but actually something that ultimately adds real value to the end product.
And we see it as less of a disruptive force and more of a transformative force.
Okay.
You know, we are embracing that kind of interdisciplinary way to move beyond the current definitions of sustainability towards regenerative design. And I believe Andrew can possibly speak more about circular design and what the guys are doing there, etc.
Yeah, Andrew, you guys have got Circular. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about that circular economy?
I certainly do, and I want to come back to it. But Keith led me in with a question that I couldn't get back to, which was how do we get away from the economics of this, or just that paradigm and that paradigm? And that's always a challenge for the manufacturing community, if you like. And you mentioned, Joan, affordable or good value, sustainable products, and that's what the consumer is looking for. You know, when you look at any sort of manufacturing, we're just part of the value chain, and someone is going to build stories around that in ideation. And the reason I get excited by guys like Keith, for example, is when he gave his experience and his background and so on. It is that multidisciplinary approach that's very hard to find in an individual. I have a similar background myself, but not as impressive as you, Keith. But in terms of even building teams so that we can communicate that value proposition so that, yes, price is still very important. You can't disregard the cost structures around this, because if you're not sustainable from a commercial perspective, you're not going to be in business anyway. And we need to change the risk parameters for those people. We've seen that through COVID, the resilience parameters, which is transformative and disruptive, and the sustainability pillar. So, this twin transition that they're talking about in Europe is so very, very important. So I think that feeds into it, and we need more people engaged in this conversation and excited by it. And we see this in investment portfolios that are green. And, from an Irish perspective, geez, we own the green color, the green jersey. The world stops once a year to be green. We have that. There's no detectable dioxin in our milks, for example, the only country in Europe. We have all of these things going forward. We should be the poster child for this globally. And as I started with the manufacturing sector being there. And you asked me about Circulaire. I'm really excited about this, Joan. Anyone who's listening to me, circulaire.ie, it's a really interesting process. It's a public-private partnership. It's run by the Department of Climate and Environment and Communications here in Ireland, supported by the EPA and, of course, the EIT Climate Kick, which is the largest PPP in Europe in climate change. And it's looking about building circularity and sustainability within manufacturing on this island. And it's one of the first of its kind anywhere in Europe. Really interesting, fantastic companies involved, as I mentioned earlier on, like the Boston Scientifics and the Johnson & Johnson Fibers and MSDs, and, people like, Glanbia and Kerry and Dairygold and so on. So it doesn't matter what sector it is. We've got Repack and so on, all coming together. But Keith is right. A huge part of what's going on there is ideation, very specific training, understanding what this can and cannot do. We've all heard the example of the Prius, that it's very safe to run and it doesn't use a lot of resource and so on. And yet to build a Prius consumes way more raw materials than a normal car. That was the old argument, if you like. And it's these kind of longer gestation conversations and understanding. But a lot of this is fundamental.
But one of the principles in that circular economy piece is re-examining business models and re-examining and I think that's going to be a real challenge for a lot of businesses. That we've been in the business of manufacturing product A, and we have a certain amount of tolerable waste within that process, and we dispose of our waste in a responsible way. But we have not necessarily concerned ourselves with end of life of our product. We have companies manufacture products and they say this product is recyclable, but actually not all products that are marketed as recyclable are not necessarily recyclable in the country in which they end up. So they're not recyclable, or they are, but we don't have that circular approach to it. And actually, I think some of the biggest challenges a lot of businesses are facing, but again, I want to focus on this idea of creativity, that we can creatively look at end of use of an end of life of product. I see Keith's got his hand up. If you got something you want to add on that, or am I going off kilter?
I'm definitely learning here to raise my hand. It's interesting because I read a great line actually first thing this morning when I woke up. It said, atoms are heavy, bits are light. And what it related to was the idea that the circular economy can be expensive. And it's how do we take that circular economy and spread that economic cost across a whole economy? And perhaps creativity is one of those kind of vehicles that we have to do that. Creativity can stimulate clients, companies, and governments, but it has to avoid any compromise on innovation or the bottom line ultimately. So, it's trying to think how we do that, how does it stretch across a whole economy? And listening to Andrew there, it seems that that's what IMR are effectively trying to do through their initiatives.
Yeah, and I think it's creativity, is not just in terms of product, but also in terms of business models, because as you say, that economics does have to stack up. I read something interesting recently that, and I had to rethink my own views on this, which was that creativity, we need more of that in organizations. But one of the things that was put forward was that actually we need greater imagination. That creativity is to make what we can already imagine, but actually to imagine something that doesn't already exist, that's the really, really challenging part. That's the really hard part. That is about challenging all of our assumptions on how the world works. And Andrew's got his hand up, so I suspect he has an answer on that one. You better. Andrew, hit me.
I'm learning how to put my hand up as well, Keith. Look at this. Look at the two of us.
My mother was a teacher. Can you tell?
Wow, well, that's obviously what's impacting on us.
Yeah, that's my wife is a teacher, so I'm used to this. I will tell you guys, brilliant ideation, Joan. Absolutely brilliant ideation. I'll give you one. There's a guy in the UK, Nick Marx. I think he calls himself a happiness researcher or something, but he's into well-being. And a really interesting character. And he talks about GDP. And this is where you're coming about new ideation and so on. GDP is a measure of the productivity of a nation or whatever. And he's saying, why don't we link that to the happiness index? How happy are the people in that country? And then he linked that to age span, life expectancy in that country. And he linked that to the consumption of resources. Now, it is fascinating to look at that scatter diagram, if you like. So what you're really talking about is, here's countries on the right-hand side that are using a huge amount of resources and are quite unhappy. And these are first world countries generally, America, for example, being a great example. And then you've got these other countries on the other side that have high happiness, longer life activity, decent GDP, and yet are consuming far less resources. Now, we already have the models internationally of these countries. I can't remember what country it was. I think it was Costa Rica was the one that, you know, they're 78.9 years is the average life expectancy. It's near to 73 in America or here even. So they've got something right. How are they doing? We have these models. Could we get our political class to really overcome some of how we measure stuff? Because what gets measured gets done. And I think, you know, if we got that sort of global idea, I'm very much looking forward to my daughter's generation coming through and kicking our butts, because we haven't done what we should have done. We've had all the knowledge, we have the technology. All we're missing is geniuses like Keith there and yourself, Joan, to sort of get into the driver's seat and make this a priority.
I actually think that's really where I'm so glad we're coming to this point in this conversation. I'm very conscious of time, but I really am, because I think that's the trick, isn't it? You know, society, economics has kind of driven an awful lot of society, and it's all been around consumption, and particularly since the Industrial Revolution, particularly after World War II. And actually, after the wars, we had actually learned a lot of innovation came after them because there was a shortage of supply of certain things, and we've had to do a lot of innovation. And now, actually, we have to learn to do more with less. And one of the things that's always, as I suppose, an artistic creative person in that sense, it is actually being able to make something out of very, very little, you know, of scrambling, you know, that scarcity, that's where the magic happens. That's where the happiness comes from. You know, we are more creative when we have less. When children are surrounded by toys, big lumps of plastic toys, they don't know what to play with.
Yep. Agreed.
And actually, when they've got one, that's their most precious thing in the whole world, and they're never bored. Or they use imagination for play, or, you know, they use the cardboard box, which is more interesting than all the stuff we've made, because it allows for space for them to do their own thing, to imagine. And we don't need to consume as much. And so if we're not consuming as much, and back to the very original point of this conversation is, well, actually, on reduce, and if we're manufacturing less, where does the economics stack up? It's about, if we attach it to happiness and well-being, then actually maybe we don't need to put as much emphasis on how much money is being made, or money being made by virtue of manufacturing more things. And actually maybe being plentiful chokes creativity, chokes imagination. You're literally shoving stuff at people, and it's overwhelming. They're drowning in stuff. And actually our happiness comes from our Marie Kondo. It comes from our Zen of taking stuff away.
You're getting very philosophical. We're still,
you know what?
We're still a consumer-driven. We're still a consumer-driven society. You're right. The problem is not necessarily the same one.
This is this. If ever anything deserved a philosophical debate,
it's consumerism.
It's the existential, you know, challenge of our time and the planet. It deserves a bit of philosophy in it. Keith,
separate an economy from a society first, and then you have a real conversation going. Well, they're not the same thing. So yeah, I agree. Sorry, Keith.
No, it's fine. It's just, it's interesting to listen, because obviously the rate of production resources is starting to decline. Non-renewable resources are starting to run out, etc. So it has become a philosophical debate. And it has become a debate. What's interesting, as you say, is the debate around play, etc. Because, you know, creativity is serious play. And this may be my last sentence, but it's in that playful space that interesting ideas actually take form. So, you know, those interesting ideas need to take form to fix the problem we have with non-renewable resources, etc. You know, we can all go on about kind of building an economy that produces more products, etc. But if we don't have the resources to produce it, then where are we ultimately left?
Well, actually, Keith, that reminds me of my old economics teacher, Peter Kern, brilliant man, English teacher also. But economics, number one, is the allocation of scarce resources. So this is the economic challenge. And actually, I was thinking about your sector just yesterday, and I was reading about the global shortage of lumber. And so obviously we need oak to make staves, to make casks. Yeah. And there is a global shortage. And part of that is due to the appalling condition of our forestry globally, but also because of the pandemic, that actually a lot of logs were not harvested last year. And so, so there is a shortage. But we're going to come to these challenges in time where we're going to challenge ourselves and say, well, can we have grain that is used for, are we going to use land to create, to farm grain that is going to be used in whiskey, or should we be using it in food, and or should we use it in animal feed, or we shouldn't be doing animal feed? So there's going to be loads of challenges on, you know, what are we planting trees for, and what the priority for using them is going to be, where are they going to be placed? There are all of these challenges too that are coming down the track where we're going to have to make really challenging choices around what we're going to prioritize.
But solving those problems will be hugely financially viable. I mean, the unicorns of the future, you know, these $100 billion turnover companies that are still owned and so on, or $1 billion companies that are still privately owned, those are more and more in the sustainable space. There's a huge opportunity here. I want to steer us back to the very beginning of your conversation, Joan. I'm up for the positivity of this. What we saw with Keith in terms of what he's doing globally. I read somewhere, you know, there's too many foreigners on the planet, you know. We're all on the same bloody planet. We're all foreign to somewhere else, you know, and this is once we get this one earth type philosophy into our minds and say, well, Ireland is actually best at doing X, Y, and Z. You know, this whole concept of demand driven consumerism is very much 1950s up to, you know, right through the Celtic Tiger and so on. There are going to be echelons of that for generations going forward, but we can reimagine. You know, we really need a Plato or an Aristotle who, you know, 2,500 years ago came up with concepts like democracy. And we need people that are now envisioning these kinds of future relationships. Star Trek being the best example. You know, we need to find a way to be able to work together and decommission some of these old constructs. And actually the underlying opportunity is sustainability will force us down that road. And that's a hugely creative thing, as Keith has said.
I think it's interesting what Keith said at the start around where Church of Oak is going in terms of localization and how we've moved from globalization. And you can create a global brand, but that you can produce locally, so that, you know, you're doing it in Kildare, and you were saying, if I have this correctly, that it's for the Irish market, and that you may decide to go to another location, but it would be for that place, of that place. Is that correct?
It's for this place of this place as an initial starting point. You know, we're looking at how we work within our communities, how we work, as I say, with local services, producers, farmers, etc. You know, and once we can establish that, then we can see where the land lies as regards building a global brand. But you have to start small to build large. You know. And ultimately, life, I think I already mentioned this, but John Benus, who's an American natural sciences writer, says life creates the conditions conducive for life. And we're looking at the conditions around us and going, how can we use those conditions to build our product effectively?
Supposing the whiskey company of the future builds a tablet, they ship the tablet to France, France puts it into a bottle of water, caps it, leaves it there for a week, and they've got Irish whiskey. You're not shipping water around the world. You've kept the whole thing nice and clean. You know, there's a whole pile of ways that we could re-ideate around all of these areas.
I did see a short video recently on whiskey that was being made, and I'm going to say this wrong. My mother was also a science teacher. I'm going to get shot for this, but molecular whiskey. So basically they were building whiskey from the molecule up. Have I got that right, Keith?
You do have that right. Now, whether our master distiller or other master distillers agree with that,
whether they agree that it's a whiskey or not is another thing. It is definitely an imbibable liquid. We will say that. Whether or not it would qualify under the rules of what makes a whiskey, but certainly an imbibable fluid, that liquid that tastes like a whiskey.
But as Andrew has alluded, rules will change. We'll have to change. So what's viable now may not be viable in 50 or 100 years' time. So we'll see where the industry goes and where all the wider industries actually land, because we will all have to ultimately change.
Yes.
And I think on that note, because we've I think no time left, that is really what this is all about. It's, I suppose, creativity, but adaptability, and that we are in a state of flux. We've used words like catalyst, we've used words like transformation, we've used words like imagination. And I think one of the things that we all have to take away in the context of the philosophy on sustainability, because we've also talked about that, is that everything is up for grabs. And the winners will probably be, as a guy once said to me, the person with the greatest flexibility has the most to gain. And I think the organizations who can prove themselves to be adaptable, to be flexible, but to have that open mindset to embrace all possibilities, not only around how they manufacture what they're manufacturing, but why they're doing it. And also, as both of you have alluded to, that end-to-end ecosystem life cycle of whatever we're making, so that it is addressing this big opportunity that is sustainability. Guys, I could chat away to the pair of you for the rest of the day. I look forward to the day that we can possibly do it with a nice glass of Church of Oak in my hand. But for now, we better keep things on the straight and narrow and to time. Andrew, Keith, thank you both so much. I've really appreciated your time today, and I'm sure that there will be some questions coming through. But for now, thank you both, and I will talk to you again.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Joan, for having us. Take it easy.